Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to the Resilient Family. My name is Jess Sherman, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm a nutritionist and mom. I work in pediatric nutrition, and I help families try to bring some simplicity to their lives by working with them to create diet strategies that best support their health. But my bigger mission really is to help parents find the resources that they need to support the health of their family, be it nutrition or whatever. So I created this series that you're partaking in. I'm calling it the Resilient Family series of webinars, and I also created a membership site where I'm archiving these webinars in case for those people who can't access them live. And the goal there is to help parents access tools and support and really gain an understanding of what's even available to them to support their own health and kids. I know when I started my family, I was lost. I was like, there's just all I wanted was to have a healthy family and not lose my mind in the process. And I found it very overwhelming because I didn't even know what I didn't even know, right? So my goal here is to really provide you with tools. So I will put, after I introduce our guest today, I'm going to put the link to the membership site in the comments section so that if you want more of this kind of tool, you can go in there and see all of the previous webinars that we have done with various professionals and various modalities. But for right now, I'm going to introduce Lisa. So I have with me today Lisa Flanders. Lisa works is a colleague of mine here at the Ottawa Integrative Health Center in Ottawa, and she is a physiotherapist, and she specializes in pelvic floor physiotherapy, which is something I didn't even know existed until about, 2 years ago or so, when I threw my back out and I went to a chiropractor, and she's like, I think your problem has more to do with your pelvic stability and your pelvic floor. And I'm like, and I had 3 children by then, didn't even know that pelvic floor was a thing. And I went to see a pelvic floor physiotherapist, and I was blown away with what I learned about what happens to your whole pelvic area after you have babies. So I invited Lisa to come and talk with us. So her interest is in women's health, pelvic floor physio. She treats the whole person. She considers each of her patients' unique needs because we all have different bodies, and really individualizes her approach, which is what I have found with most pelvic physios. So welcome, Lisa. I want to welcome you here and just get you to sort of introduce yourself. And if you could give us an idea of what you do and why it's such a passion of yours, what a pelvic physiotherapist does.
Thank you so much, Jess. And I hope you can hear me okay. So just put a thumbs up if you can. Perfect. Okay, so my name is Lisa Flanders. I am a physiotherapist at the Ottawa Integrative Health Center. My primary focus is women's health and pelvic floor physiotherapy. So what that means is that I focus on the muscles, the joints, the tendons, the ligaments that are associated with our pelvis. So this is the muscles that we find inside the vagina, inside the rectum, that are responsible for bowel function, for bladder function, for sexual function. And really the population that I treat mainly is women, but I'm not opposed to treating men. I do have some men that come into my practice. So I treat women typically that are either prenatal, so pregnant, or women in the postnatal phase, all the way up to women that are in their 70s or 80s, sort of postmenopausal stage. And I do also women, so women who've never had children, who come to see me for various pelvic floor concerns. And we can chat about that a little bit as well, the different types of concerns that I would see. So what really got me focused on pelvic floor physiotherapy, really what got me focused on physiotherapy is that when I was a teenager, I had an injury and I was referred to a physiotherapist. So I was referred for a shoulder injury, and I was just really blown away by how muscle instability can create various dysfunction in the body. And I was young, I was 15 years old, a competitive swimmer. And I was having this that was affecting my swimming career. So I was able to get in to see this physiotherapist, get some of these muscle imbalances under control, and able to continue on. And I've never had a shoulder problem since. And then when I started my physiotherapy career, I shadowed a physiotherapist in Ontario who did a little bit of women's health focus, and she allowed me to come and sit in on a couple sessions. And I thought, like, this is so interesting that we can really help these women that come with various concerns. And at the time I thought it was just incontinence, so leaking with coughing and sneezing. But as I kind of explored into various courses, I realized just the vast realm of pelvic health and everything that it entails. So what keeps me passionate is just basically seeing how I help people every single day and the changes that I make in my clients every single day. So it's really exciting for me. And I feel like I'm constantly learning and constantly being challenged, which is really a great part of my job.
Yeah, it's amazing because I learned about this, like I said in the intro, because I had an issue going on with my hip, and I kept throwing my back out when I would try and exercise. And, you know, and then my chiropractor would put it back in, and I went to see osteopaths and all this sort of stuff. And then I learned that, like you're saying, that this internal instability was causing problems that didn't actually look like they should be related, but really were. So you must see that all the time.
Yes, I see all sorts of different concerns in the pelvic floor. So most people think that it entails leaking with like leakage, so urinary leakage, or an inability to hold the bladder, which makes up, you know, a reasonable amount of my practice. So the statistics are that 1 in 3 women will experience some form of urinary incontinence in their life, and 1 in 9 men will experience some form of urinary incontinence in their life. But I see so much more than just urinary incontinence. So really the array of things that I would treat. So like you said, with your hip injury, I see a lot of people that come in with chronic hip pain or chronic low back pain, or even pubic bone pain. And that can be often related to the pelvic floor, or other muscle instability, so in the abdomen, in the low back. And the pelvic floor is really just a piece of the core. It's a very small piece of our deep core system. Our core system is made up of 4 structures. So our diaphragm, which sits on top, it sits underneath our rib cage. We have our abdominal muscles, our deep abdominal muscles in the front. We have the pelvic floor at the bottom, and then we have these little tiny back muscles called multifidus in the back. So all 4 of those structures have to work together to have a strong, stable core, and that can impact how the hips work, how the pelvis works, how the lower back works. And then on top of that, I do see a lot of people that have really tense pelvic floors, so muscles that are really tight and really not able to function properly. They're sitting in this very tight, pre-contracted state, really trying to hold on, and that can cause things like pelvic pain, tailbone pain, painful intercourse. So there's quite a vast variety of things that I'll see on a daily basis.
So when I went to see, finally, after like 9 years after I should have, went to go see a pelvic floor physiotherapist, she did an internal exam. She actually got in there, and she, like you say, was finding some muscles that were too contracted and some that were weak. So sometimes it wasn't actually just a weakness. Sometimes it was just like overcompensating. So that's sort of what you look for as well. Is it an overcompensating?
Yeah, I see sort of a combination of the two. So I'll see muscles that are undercompensating and then muscles that are trying to overcompensate. And so that really creates this asymmetry or imbalance in the pelvic floor. So, well, you know, maybe the posterior muscles are very overcompensated and the anterior muscles are not functioning at all, or not functioning optimally. And that can lead to things like incontinence or stress urinary incontinence. It can lead to various dysfunctions. So it's not necessarily that the muscles are going to be too weak or that the muscles are going to be too tight, but it can be definitely a combination between the two.
And then do you actually fix the problem by manipulating those muscles, or do you teach exercises so that we fix the problem?
So I like to do a combination of both, and it really depends on what that person needs on that day. So I do a lot of manual internal therapy, which involves internal manual release. So it's almost like trigger point release, or it's not massage, so it's more like a trigger point release of the internal structures. And then I like to also be able to leave that person with things that they can do at home to maintain what we've done on that session between visits. So yes, there is hands-on therapy involved, but I also like to give that client the ability to maintain what we've been working on. And that's the same goes for if there is muscle weakness, is that we will definitely learn and teach how to engage the muscles during the exam and during the visit. But I want to leave that person with something to go home with so that they can continue to make those changes at home. And then I'm more just the person that they would see in the interim every, say, 3 to 4 weeks for a checkup and a continuation of what their homework is.
One of the things that I learned from the physiotherapist I went to go see was that she could actually feel my first child was a C-section, and she could actually feel the scarring inside and showed me how to release that soft tissue, I guess, because it was pulling on other, I don't really understand it. Maybe you could explain it a little bit more, but she was saying like the soft tissue of this scar was pulling on other things and causing some instability.
Yeah, so the way that scar tissue works, scar tissue is much different than regular tissue or sound. So regular tissue lays down in this really beautiful manner where the fibers are lined up in a really lovely way. So that's the way that new tissue forms when our skin tissue sloughs off and whatnot. But scar tissue, its goal is to just cover the wound. So instead of laying down in this really lovely pattern, it will start to lay down really mismatched and just as quick as it can, it wants to cover that wound and that incision. And that scar tissue, what happens is it starts to create kinks in various places. So I'm going to stand up so that you can see my shirt, and I'll show you on my shirt what that would look like. So see, I'm wearing this lovely blue shirt today, and it's fairly smooth. But if I take an incision, so let's say that that's a C-section, this scar tissue would be, but we'll just use as an example. So let's say on the left side here, that scar bound itself down and twisted. Its goal was really just to cover. So I have a twist now in my fabric, and you can actually see the different lines of pull that creates around the scar tissue. So now my body has this tendency to start to curve into the scar tissue, and then that can lead to an overcompensation from my left side because now it's becoming very tense, and maybe my right side is becoming very weak. So scar tissue does play a really big role in how our body sits as a whole, and that's any scar. So it can be the smallest scar to the largest scar. So anytime anyone's had surgery, regardless of whether it's a C-section or other surgery, we're going to have that scar tissue laid down, and we want to make sure that scar tissue is laid down in a nice manner so that we can have movement between the tissues.
That's amazing. By the way, for the people who are listening and watching, there's a chat on the side. You should see a chat room, and if you have any questions for Lisa, you can write them in the chat, and I'll make sure to ask them to her. I know I got tons. Fascinating, and I find it amazing that this is not part of postnatal care, right? Like is there anywhere where this is actually part of postnatal care? You have to kind of seek it out yourself, I think, right?
Yeah, and in Canada, you really would have to seek this out. So hopefully you have a really great team behind you, and at the first sign of dysfunction, they know where to refer you. But over in Europe, there's a lot of places in Europe. So I know France is one, and I believe that the Netherlands is another, that a normal part of postnatal care would be a referral for pelvic floor physiotherapy, and that's typically covered by the healthcare system. So as soon as somebody has a baby, they are given for pelvic floor care, and that unfortunately doesn't happen in Canada. And so, sometimes I see someone who's been living with 5 years of dysfunction after having a baby, and their baby's now 5 years old. And that's something that we, could have tackled much sooner and had them live without dysfunction much sooner.
So in an ideal situation, like for people who are watching who might be pregnant, for example, or have just had a baby, there's probably that group who's watching, but then there's also people who are watching who have older children and are like, damn, have I missed the boat on this? Can you give us a time frame of like, when is it most effective to see someone like, is it ever too late?
So it's never too late to see a pelvic floor physiotherapist. If I had my ideal world, I would see all women at least one time while they were pregnant. And that would be to give them the tools and the information to connect their brain to their pelvic floor before baby comes. Now that's obviously my ideal world, is not the reality. So typically we'll wait about 6 to 8 weeks during the postpartum period before I would have someone come to the clinic for an internal exam and any work on the pelvic floor. That doesn't mean that if baby comes and 2 weeks later you're having a lot of low back pain, that doesn't mean that there aren't other things that we can do. But just the body does need that time to heal, that postpartum period to heal, before we would do any internal examination or any work specific to the pelvic floor. So 6 to 8 weeks would be ideal postpartum, and then really any time after that. So like I said, I do see a lot of women that are in their 60s and 70s, and sometimes they've been having these concerns for a number of years. And I often hear things like, well, I've been having leakage since my youngest daughter was born. And then we get into the conversation and they say, oh, well, and she's 19 or she's 28 now or however old. So it's never too late and we can absolutely see change. But the sooner the better, because it's just less time that you're living with dysfunction.
And from what I understand, like, this is a subspecialty of physio, so not all physios have this training, right? You do some kind of extra training for this, is that right?
That's correct. So when I graduated from university, I wasn't able to do internal exams. And I really, to be honest, didn't have a lot of knowledge of the pelvic floor. I felt like what I learned in school was just this very basic, I think maybe we had 2 lectures on it over the course of my 2-year master's. So this is a specialized training. So what happens is, after I graduated, I did a 40-hour course, and that was just a very introductory course where we learned about the pelvic floor anatomy. We learned the treatments for incontinence and prolapse, and then we actually performed exams on subjects, and those subjects were ourselves. So I've had internal exams done for the basis of pelvic floor training, and then I've given exams on colleagues of mine. So it was a really great way to basically both learn what it was going to feel like and then also get feedback from another physiotherapist. And then after that, we actually had to, after that level 1 course, you do have to write an exam as well. And then I had to prove to the College of Physiotherapy of Ontario that I'd done the training, and I became what was called a rostered physiotherapist. So I'm rostered to do internal work, which means if you looked my name up on the College of Physiotherapists of Ontario website, you would see next to my name that I carry this rostered, this controlled act, which is for pelvic floor physiotherapy. So currently I don't know, on the last time I checked, which is about a year ago, there was 17 physiotherapists in Ottawa that were able to do internal exams. I know that number's gone up a little bit because I do know a few of the newer pelvic floor physiotherapists in Ottawa. But yes, it is specialized training, and not everybody is going to be trained to do internal exams.
And so for people who are not in Ottawa, but maybe are in Canada, is there like a directory or something where they could find somebody in their area that specializes in this? So in Canada, there's not a directory. You will be able to find links on various websites of practitioners in your area. If you're in Ontario, the best way to go about it is if you go to the College of Physiotherapy of Ontario, or the College of Physiotherapists of Ontario. There's a link on the top that says find a physiotherapist, and you can actually search out a physiotherapist based on a controlled act. So it would be, you'd be looking for a rostered physiotherapist, and then you can actually search out by your location. So I'll often get colleagues that will say, oh, I know someone in Barrie. Do you know a pelvic floor physiotherapist there? And so what I typically do to find that person is that's how I would search them, and then I'll see the names that come up. And if I recognize a name, maybe from a course I've taken, or maybe it's a colleague of mine from university, then I'll refer them to that person first. But I also give the entire list, because I mean, some of these cities are really big. If we search in Toronto, lots of people are going to come up, but Toronto's a very big city. I believe all the other colleges in Canada have a similar option, but I can't confirm that. But there are other websites as well. So I know that there are a few websites that you can be listed on. So like
the Incontinence Canada website, you can list yourself. Now, I'm not listed on that site. That's something that I would do on my own, and I haven't listed myself on that site. But there are other ways that you can find. So it would be through Google search. Also talking to your local physiotherapist or your medical doctor would be another way to get a referral to someone who's trained specifically for pelvic health.
Awesome. Okay. So there's two things that I want to talk about that are like, there's a lot of confusion about that I know probably you guys have a really good perspective on. One is Kegels. We're always taught to do our Kegels. And the second one is diastasis. So can you talk a little bit about that? If you have any kind of exercises you can bring us through, or just to help us sort of understand how to put this into practice, something that we can do if Kegels and if those are helpful, or also what to do if we have a diastasis. So that's kind of two wrapped into one. So maybe just one at a time.
Sure. So Kegels, that's the big question, is do we do Kegels or do we not do Kegels? So what is a Kegel contraction? A Kegel contraction is a sustained muscle contraction of the pelvic floor. So, the whole idea is to do it at a stoplight, do it while you're cooking dinner, do it while you're standing in line in a grocery store. But the way that they're trained to be done is just do it like seated. This is very static. The other thing that often happens is that people come into my clinic and I will test their muscle strength, and I'll say, okay, I just want you to do a muscle contraction, or I want you to do a Kegel, and they're not doing anything related to a pelvic floor contraction. So they're maybe squeezing their glute muscles or squeezing their thigh muscles together. So typically they're not done correctly. So that's why I would not just blanket everyone and say, oh, let's all do Kegels and we'll all be fine. If that was the case, there'd be no need for special people who specialize in this type of treatment, because we would be able to cure everything with Kegels. The other thing that I notice is that although someone might get a muscle contraction, it often does not occur in the right spot. So if someone's coming to see me and they have urinary incontinence, and then I say, okay, I want to test your muscle strength, and all the muscle contraction is coming from the back of their pelvis, so more from the rectum, and nothing's supporting the bladder or urethra. So then we actually have to bring their awareness more to the front of the pelvic floor to make it more symmetrical. Or perhaps, the left side is firing, but the right side is not. And again, that makes a very unstable pelvic floor. My really big problem with Kegels is that they typically aren't done with breathing. So people will just hold their breath and just try to contract everything that they can. And then they're also done statically. So meaning that we do them lying down in bed, or we do them sitting in the car. But we're not static people. We're very dynamic people. We, run, we jump, we walk, we carry babies. So why are we training a muscle in a static way when we know our whole body is very dynamic? This would be very similar if you had an injury from running. So let's say you'd hurt your leg and you came to see me, and all I had to do was seated quadricep contractions over and over. And I said, oh, that's going to heal you. Well, no, your goal was to run, and that doesn't transfer at all to running, just contracting and relaxing the quadricep. So I like to start sometimes with a Kegel contraction, or train someone how to do it properly through breathing. But then we really do want to make it dynamic, because we are dynamic people. So that would be the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question, do you have a question in between? I'll let you ask a question in between.
I just have a question about that. When you say dynamic, do you mean in relationship with the rest of your body? Is that what you mean? Oh. You're muted.
Sorry, yes, I mean in relationship with the rest of the body, but also through movement. So a dynamic movement or a dynamic exercise is one that we do while moving or combining maybe multiple body parts. So, I might start someone off doing something very statically, but then I want to combine it with maybe a squat, or I want to combine it with like a leg lift. So I want to turn it into a static exercise when they get to the point that they can still maintain that level of strength through that dynamic activity.
So there's sort of two pieces of that I'm hearing, which is, one is that you never want to do an exercise like a Kegel in isolation. It's always in context of function, sort of like it's in context of how you move. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so like I see a lot of women that come in will say, oh, like I can't jump on the trampoline anymore. So they're having their dysfunction is occurring during a jumping activity, or like jumping jacks would be another really common one, or skipping rope. So their dysfunction is occurring in a dynamic way. So we need to train that muscle to work in a dynamic way. So it needs to work in conjunction with that movement that they're doing. So that's why if we're just doing our static Kegels, well, of course they're not going to work. And then, 9 times out of 10, that person is also not doing that contraction appropriately. And so they're not training the correct muscles.
Yeah, that was one thing that happened to me when I went to see the physio is she said, okay, do a contraction. And I did it. And while she was doing her internal exam, she's like, no, you're not doing it. And so then I did it again. And she's like, no, you're not doing it. And I was actually contracting another muscle. So that was the other part of is that your pelvic floor is made up of a lot of different pieces. And so you can't just say contract, like you can contract the front or the back or the side or all these different, there's like a lot of muscle isolation that you guys do. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the other piece as well. If you think that you're doing a muscle contraction properly and you're only ever firing the left side of the muscle or the left side of the body, then that is in no way functional. That's the other thing as well, when we're, again, if someone's only firing the posterior, but their problem is at the anterior, again, this is never going to train them to be functional. The other thing that I often see is that people don't know how to relax their muscles in between. And for our muscles to be functional, they do have to be able to both contract fully and relax fully. And so if there's never that relaxation component that happens, we're just going to end up with these very hypertense muscles. I often explain this, desk workers seem to really relate to this one, and a lot of people work in offices in Ottawa. But if you've ever been doing a lot of work at your computer and your shoulders end up really tense ears, and then you've been doing a lot of work, the muscles feel really tense, and then someone comes along and touches them and it's really painful. The same thing can happen in the pelvis. So if we have these really hypertense pelvic floor muscles and then someone touches them, or we're having intercourse or trying to insert a tampon, that kind of to that same painful feeling. So that relaxation is just as important as the contraction itself.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So you had mentioned a few ways that you could show us to kind of connect with our pelvic floor or try to figure out whether this is a problem for us and just get us started. I do still want to talk about diastasis. I don't know what makes sense to do first, if you want to address the diastasis thing, or maybe do that in context of the breathing work that you want to show us.
Yeah, why don't we talk about diastasis first, and then I'll turn my computer around so that we can use the treatment table over here, and we can talk about breathing and how we can actually use our breath to connect the pelvic floor. So diastasis recti, for anybody that does not know, is a separation of the abdominal muscles, usually in relation to pregnancy. So as baby grows, and you can't really see the stomach here, but let me see if I can put that down slightly. So as baby grows out, our six-pack abs, so the ones that actually make our six-pack, the muscles themselves get a little bit stretched because we have to accommodate room for baby. And then the connective tissue that holds the two sides together stretches out as well. This is to accommodate the growing baby. Now, I think there's a misconception that diastasis only happens in women and only happens in women that are pregnant. But I've seen a number of men come into the clinic with low back pain that have diastasis, either from doing inappropriate abdominal exercises or also from being overweight. So that can also stretch the abdominal muscles out. So what that diastasis creates, it creates this separation between the abdominal muscles between the left and right, and basically creates an instability in our core system. So I always describe this as if you think of a can of Coke as your core system, and I don't have a can of Coke here, but I do have my water bottle here. So if I have the diaphragm on the top and my abdominal muscles in the front, and then my pelvic floor is at the bottom, and then in the back I have my deep back muscles, and then I press down on this structure, it's fairly stable. But if I took the same structure and I cut a hole down the front and I pressed on the top, it would actually collapse in on itself. So the diastasis can create some instability through low back pain or pelvic pain or weakness in the core system. Very, very common during pregnancy, and very common postpartum. Now, in many women, about the 6 to 8 week postpartum period, that the connective tissue is able to heal itself, but I don't actually remember the actual stat off the top of my head, but it's fairly high of women that their diastasis remains open, so greater than 1 centimeter for after the 8 week postpartum period is over. Sorry, I'm leaving that open to you for another question.
That's okay. I thought you froze for a second there. That's fine. So I know there's some confusion about whether you should be exercising if you have diastasis, or whether you need to repair that diastasis, or even whether it can be repaired without surgery, or when it's safe to start, moving your body again, and that kind of thing. Can you speak a little bit to that, of what parents should do if they have diastasis?
Yeah, so in the early postpartum period, the best exercises to do in that period of time are very low impact. So things like walking. I love swimming. If you have access to a pool and you don't have a scar that's repairing itself, then if you can get into a pool early on, that's a great activity as well. So there are definitely some things that you want to avoid when you have a diastasis. And the sort of top 3 things you want to avoid are crunches. So any sort of abdominal crunch or sit up. You want to avoid anything where both legs are off the ground. So any sort of double leg lift. This is, the types of poses that we might see in yoga or Pilates. And you also want to avoid plank exercises. The other thing, that's exercise-wise that we want to avoid. The other things that we want to avoid are anything that's going to increase the intra-abdominal pressure. So increase the pressure in our abdomen. And so that's things like breath holding. So during bowel movements, we don't want to strain during a bowel movement or hold our breath. We don't want to hold our breath while we're picking our kids up. We really want to make sure that we're breathing. We want to avoid anything that's going to increase that pressure on our abdomen, and any downward force onto the pelvic floor. Can a diastasis be corrected? Yes. What does that mean? It's not necessarily about closing that space between the left and right side, but it's about supporting the connective tissue across. And we can use our pelvic floor and our deep abdominal, transverse abdominal muscles to help support the connective tissue. So you might have a diastasis that remains open, but it's still functional because we're able to right. And then there are times as well where that gap will close. But I've seen situations where the gap has been small, but we still have a really big indentation. So I can really sink my fingers down between the left and right abdominal muscle, and that there's still a diastasis there, even though it's not a wide diastasis. It's basically not wide, but it's deep. And that's quite common. So it's not necessarily just about closing the left and right side. It's about being able to generate tension across the abdominal muscles to support that opening. I think there was a third part to the question, but now I can't remember what it was.
Well, that's interesting to think about this whole idea of a functional diastasis, that you can actually, it looks like you have diastasis, but it's actually quite factually okay and stable, and that's something that you can assess for, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely something that we can assess for. So it's how you use your deep core system as a whole. And so that deep core system, like I said, is that those 4 structures: the diaphragm, the abdominal muscles, the pelvic floor, and then the back muscles. And it's how they all work together. So if they're working together in a functional manner and you're able to have support across the left and right side of the diastasis, it can be still open and it can still appear to be open. But when you start engaging those muscles, getting that tension across, and it's supporting it.
It's so important for us to know, just for, just for our function and for stability. Like I was saying, I wanted to get back to exercise, and every time I would start exercising, I would throw my back out for like a few weeks, right? And then you start to get scared about actually getting back in shape, and it really impacts your quality of life. And I wish I had known this stuff right after my very first baby. But you know what, like I got to health floor physio 9 years too late, but it's still very helpful. And now getting myself back in shape with that help. So you were going to take us through some exercises. I just want to remind people that if they have questions for Lisa, type them in the chat on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll be sure to ask them. Yes, talking about some exercises you could help introduce us to our pelvic floors. And well, I'll just let you explain what you have in mind.
So the first, like the most important thing about any sort of pelvic floor rehabilitation or pelvic floor physiotherapy is understanding where your pelvic floor is and how to connect your brain to your pelvic floor. And I think the best way to do this is through breathing. First of all, most people don't breathe properly. So I think if I can teach breathing at any point, it's a good thing. But it's also a really good way to understand what's happening, how we can use the breath, both help relax the pelvic floor, but then eventually help to initiate a pelvic floor contraction and a functional pelvic floor contraction and a dynamic pelvic floor contraction. So I'm just gonna unplug my computer because it's plugged in right now, and I'm gonna turn it around so that I can stand up, and then I'll explain the relationship between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor and how we can actually use breathing to connect with the pelvic floor. So just give me 1 second here. I'm gonna unplug my earphones. And Jess, you can still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to turn around like this, and I'm just going to turn this.
I'm curious why Lisa does this. I'm curious to find out if people want to write in the chat if they've seen the pelvic floor physio, and if it was helpful. So just type it in there and tell us if you feel comfortable.
There we go. Is that bright enough? Can you see me okay?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, we can see you.
Okay.
Mysterious.
So the relationship between our breathing and the pelvic floor. Diaphragm sits. It sits in this little dome shape underneath our rib cage. And as we inhale, the diaphragm contracts and lowers. And what that does is it creates a negative pressure in the thorax. So that's why we get an influx of, this is how we breathe in. At the same time, it creates this positive pressure in the abdomen. And that positive pressure, that increase in intra-abdominal pressure has to go somewhere. So it comes out a little bit and down a little bit. So this is why we call this a belly breath when we breathe. Now, I find that most people, when we sit at a computer desk, so I'm not going to sit down, but when we sit at our computer desk, we end up kind of ramming our back close to the screen. And what happens is we start to breathe with our shoulders. So shoulders rise and shoulders fall. And that does nothing to our abdomen, and it does nothing to our pelvic floor. The other thing as women, what we tend to do is tummies in, right? We're trying to hold our tummies in. We're trying to look like, make our tummies look flatter so that we hold our stomachs in. We learn to do this really young. And then same thing, if I'm holding my tummy in, then I'm breathing from my shoulders. This means that my shoulders start to get tense because they're having to do so much work with this breathing. But at the same time, I'm not getting any pelvic floor relaxation happening, and I can really create that tight, asymmetrical, dysfunctional pelvic floor that way. So I like to always talk about breathing first as a way to connect. So as we breathe in and our diaphragm contracts and lowers, we want that pelvic floor to relax slightly. And this will take some practice to actually get the hang of, but basically they work together. So diaphragm lowers, pelvic floor lowers, diaphragm raises, pelvic floor raises back up. So I typically recommend starting any breathing exercise in a lying down position. And I'm just going to move my computer so that you can see the table a little bit better. You can see it. You can see it now. That's good there. So I typically will recommend doing any sort of exercise, any sort of breathing exercise and lying down, because this actually turns off our abdominal muscles and it makes it a little, and when I say turns off, it means that they're not having to work to support us in standing, and it makes that belly breath a little bit easier. So I always recommend to lie down on your back with your knees bent. I'll show you my abdomen right here. And then I'm going to inhale in through my nose. And as I inhale, I first want to feel that air filling into my lungs. So I'm going to start my first breath and just feel the air coming into my lungs. And then I'm going to exhale out through my mouth, through pursed lips. So it's going to look like I'm whistling. On my next breath in, I'm going to try to breathe in a little bit longer, and I'm going to try to breathe into my belly button. So I'm going to try to feel my belly button rise. And then exhale out through my mouth again. And on my third breath, I'm actually going to imagine that I'm breathing all the way down into my pelvis. So I'm going to move my hand a little bit lower down into my pelvis. And I'm going to breathe in again through my nose. And then out through my mouth. And this is where a lot of people struggle. They have a very hard time breathing past their ribs because we're so used to holding our stomachs in and we're so used to sitting and we have a really hard time letting that air, and the air doesn't go down that low, but it's that feeling of the air going down low into the pelvis. So what I'll typically recommend to people, please start my recommendation with, I'm just going to turn this back around, is just to start with breathing. And if we can start with some of those deeper breathing, longer breathing exercises and try to actually feel when the air gets really low down into the pelvis, that's a really great way to start connecting with the pelvis. And then from that, then we will typically start adding in some sort of a contraction or dynamic movement, dynamic exercise along with that. But breathing is typically the first thing that we have to work on. And I find I have to teach a lot of people how to breathe properly just because we have bad habits over time. We sit, we're desk workers, and we hold our stomachs in, or we wear Spanx all the time, like things that disallow our belly to move and our pelvic floor to relax.
So if, how you're saying before that, we think about pelvic floor contractions, usually we call them Kegels, but a slight difference, I think. Right? And usually we're like, you do it in line and do it when you're, on the toilet and stuff like that. Stop your pee. If you're doing, and you were saying before that not to do that, but if you can do that while you're breathing, like you just described, is that a good exercise to start to reconnect? So breathing and doing a little bit of contracting, or not even?
I'm just plugging my earphones back in 1 second. So I typically don't recommend that anybody does any sort of Kegel contraction until they've been evaluated by a pelvic floor physiotherapist. And the reason behind that is that I don't want to see you practicing and getting into the habit of doing something incorrectly. So if you can be evaluated by someone with the internal evaluation and get that proper feedback and start adding the appropriate contraction in for what your concern is, then you're going to have better outcomes and it's going to be more ideal. So if you're going to start with any exercise, I would just start with your breathing exercise. And I mean, it never hurts to breathe. We have so much research on diaphragmatic breathing, long areas health concerns, not just pelvic floor concerns. So if I can get people breathing a little bit more and a little bit better, then I think overall health is going to follow.
Sage advice. Breathe. Always good. So on that note, I don't see any questions in the chat. You've given us lots to think about, and I think a nice introduction of what pelvic floor is and how it relates to your overall health. If you could leave our audience, which is probably all women, probably all mothers, with varying age child from 0 to probably I don't know, 0 and up parents, mothers. What do you want every mother to know about the stuff that you do and their own bodies?
So first of all, questions is because I find that people are often embarrassed to ask. And this is not embarrassing. You're not the only person that's experiencing this. So when I went back to my previous stat that 1 in 3 women do have pelvic floor, or 1 in 3 women will experience urinary incontinence. But nearly half of all women will experience some sort of pelvic floor dysfunction in their life. So that's half of all women are going through this. So you are not the only one, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about, nothing to be ashamed about. And just know that there are people out there that can help. So that's why I ask questions, because I always find when I do talks like this, not a lot of people want to ask questions in front of everyone else, but you're always welcome to email me, get in contact with me another way, and I have no problem answering your questions in a more private manner. Something that I want to leave everyone with is that's really, what I'd want to leave people with is that no, you're not alone in this, that you're not the only person that's going through this, that it's not normal. So I think it unfortunately gets normalized sometimes in our healthcare system that, oh, you've had kids, this is normal now. And, that's just the way it is now. It's not normal. This is common. These are common concerns. But we don't normalize things that can be easily treated. So know that there is help out there. And if you do have a concern, very important to get yourself taken care of. You can't take care of your family if you don't take care of yourself first.
Yeah, that's one of my big mantras is we can't raise happy, healthy children unless we're happy, healthy parents. And we got to take care of ourselves. And we have to feed ourselves. We have to sleep. We have to take care of our bodies, even though we don't have enough time, because we never have enough time because we're wearing 75,000 hats and doing too much. But we have to find the space and the time for ourselves. And often we have to get really creative about how we're going to do that. Creative with our money, creative with our time. We have to ask for help, right? So that we can carve out that little space and that little time. So yeah, I'm right there on that one for sure. I just posted in the chat the Ottawa Integrative Health Center, which is where Lisa practices. Are you out in the Birth and Wellness Center too?
Yeah, I'm at the Ottawa Birth and Wellness Center which is our satellite clinic of the Ottawa Integrative Center. So we're at the Birth and Wellness Center. I'm there on Tuesdays, usually in the mornings, but I typically will stay all day. So Tuesdays, I'm going to say 9 to 4. And then Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, I'm at our main location on Carlin and Island Park. And the other thing I'm just going to add in, I know when we're talking about finding time, I always invite people to bring their babies in. So if you are a new mom and you're worried about how you're going to get down for an appointment, or you're not sure if you can find anyone to hold your little one, to watch your little one while you come down, or if you just aren't ready to leave them at home by themselves, bring them in. We can, have them in the carrier. I work around babies all the time. So if you need to feed while we're having our appointment, that's not a problem. It's never been an issue. So we always invite that you can bring your little one with you for your appointment.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Lisa. The other link that I just put in the chat is the link to my membership site, which is free. And it's a place that I've just dumped a whole bunch of resources. Most of it is about food because that's my thing. But then I also have the archived Resilient Family webinars that I've done with other helpful people like Lisa, and this one will be in there as well. So you can take a look at that. And also, we have a Facebook group as well, the Raising Resilience Facebook group. And in there, I really want people to tell me what they want to hear about, what they want to learn about, so that I can find someone to answer your questions. So be sure to check that out as well. If I would leave someone on this topic, if I would leave people with one thing, would be just go get an assessment. It's amazing. These pelvic floor physiotherapists have such a deep understanding of what's going on in your body that you'll be stunned. And whether or not you follow up and do the exercises and whatever, it's like Lisa says, it's never too late. And it's an amazing way to get to know your body and what's going on. So thank you so much, Lisa, for your time. And you can, if you want to get in touch with Lisa directly, just go to the Ottawa Integrative Health Center website and you can contact her through that. Is that the best way? You have a blog too, right?
Yeah, I do. So I have a blog, which is lisaflanders.ca. I'll be posting my latest blog post hopefully by the end of the week, which is talks a little bit about what the difference is between what I do and what's going to happen at your pap test. So I know a lot of women don't necessarily, you know, that's not the favorite time of year is going for your pap test, but it's much different than what happens at the pap test, and it's much more comfortable. So stay tuned for that blog post, which should hopefully be up by tomorrow.
Awesome. I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much again, Lisa. And thank you everyone for taking the time to join us on our Hangout. I'll talk to you again in another video, hopefully. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.